On the afternoon of April 14th, 1935, the residents of the Oklahoma Panhandle witnessed an apocalypse. It began as a clear, warm Sunday. Families were driving home from church or preparing picnics. Radios hummed with big band music, and the weekend newspaper promised nothing but the usual. Then, the temperature suddenly plummeted. Thousands of birds filled the sky, frantically fleeing a terror rising on the horizon. It looked like a churning, solid mass of earth, rising 10,000 feet into the air and stretching for hundreds of miles.
Flew away. Technologists were abandoned by their own land.
When it struck, it swallowed cars, buried fences, and turned high noon into the pitch black of midnight in seconds. It was the worst storm of the era. People called it a black blizzard, a name that would come to define what history remembers as Black Sunday. But while it felt like a sudden, strange act of God, the truth was far more human. To understand where this black wall came from, we would have to go back a century, precisely to America's westward expansion. The idea of manifest destiny, the belief that Americans were meant to spread across the whole continent by moving west and taming the wilderness, pushed homesteaders deeper into the Great Plains during the late 1800s. Now, these weren't areas of gentle farmland. They were semi-arid grasslands held together by tough prairie roots that had survived thousands of years of wind and drought. But as part of the manifest destiny, government policy encouraged settlement. Railroads were built, opportunities promoted, and laws like the Homestead Act offered free land to anyone willing to live on it and farm it, turning expansion into an American duty, not just an opportunity. And so, the people came. And when they did, they didn't farm like the indigenous nations who lived there before and understood the dry climate. Instead, settlers brought East Coast farming habits, plowing, planting, and expanding as quickly as possible. And for a while, it seemed to work. However, things would begin to change in the 20th century.
Consequently,
particularly
this country
with the onset of World War I.
is at war with Germany.
With the war dragging on, Europe was burning and starving. A global food shortage pushed U.S. President Woodrow Wilson to meet the demand. He signed the Lever Act, giving the government power to control food production, claiming it was for the improvement of American agriculture. Under it, Wilson set minimum wheat prices, guaranteed government buying, and restricted hoarding. So, farmers planted more because profit was locked in and the risk was removed. Naturally, prices shot up, and the Great Plains became a wheat boom zone. People tore up millions of acres of grassland. Entire counties converted from prairie to farmland almost overnight. Banks loosened credit, offering bigger loans, and financed tractors and more land as government price guarantees made repayment seem safe. New tractors with giant plows made it easy to rip soil that had never been touched before. And as long as rain fell, the land produced. Farmers called it "the rain follows the plow," as if nature rewarded them for their effort. Then, the war ended. Europe recovered, and global wheat demand and prices collapsed. But matters were about to get even worse.
Time came when the ticker tape in the broker's office told a new story.
enters. The stock market crashed. In 1929, the world would experience what we now know as the beginning of the Great Depression. The price of wheat just plummeted. For farmers, this would become a survival crisis. A bushel of wheat that once supported a family could barely buy basic goods. So, they did the only thing they could think of. Plant even more wheat. Expand further. Plow deeper. This panic-driven expansion destroyed the last patches of native prairie. By 1930, the plains were a giant exposed field with almost no plant roots holding soil in place. And even with all the uncontrolled farming, it still wasn't a problem. Until the rain stopped. Right as the Great Depression began, a natural climate pattern that appears every few years showed up. This event is called La Niña, and it cools the Pacific waters near the U.S., stripping moisture from the inland air, setting up drought-like conditions. Now, this is a common phenomenon, but this time it happened at an extremely desperate time. As a result, it would hit the plains real hard. The exposed, overplowed soil baked under the sun until it turned to powder. Now imagine this same powdery soil meeting the Great Plains wind. Storms formed out of loose earth that people described them as black blizzards. The press called this the Dust Bowl. These storms carried away entire fields, buried cars, and suffocated the cattle. By the mid-1930s, the situation was so severe that daily life simply failed. Schools closed because children couldn't breathe. Kids got dust pneumonia. And many adults had permanent lung damage from living in constant dust clouds. Farmers raised fences, hoping their farms would not be buried, and pumped water into their parched fields through makeshift irrigation systems. Dust reached as far as Chicago, Washington, even ships on the Atlantic Ocean. With no other options left, people packed their belongings and started leaving by any means they could find. Most headed west toward California, hoping for seasonal work. Route 66 became the main escape path, and when they felt they had left the worst behind, they would realize it was just the beginning. The country was in its deepest economic crisis, and unemployment was sky high. In fact, it was so bad that instead of receiving the help these migrants very much needed, they were unwelcome everywhere. California, fearing it would be swamped by desperate workers, set up inspection stations at the state line. Police checked families' money, questioned their plans, and only let them through if officials believed they could support themselves. Yes, these were basically immigration checkpoints, except people were just trying to enter a neighboring state. In fact, the crisis got so severe that agriculture became a central topic during the next presidential election campaigns.
This, my friends, is most reassuring to me. It shows that there is in this country unbounded confidence in the future of sound agriculture and of honorable industry. And I pledge you this, and I invite your help in the happy task of restoration.
And when Franklin D. Roosevelt won and took office, he signed the Agricultural Adjustment Act in his very first month in office. The program paid farmers to reduce production of certain crops with the hope of conserving soil and increasing prices by limiting supply. Almost the opposite of what Woodrow Wilson's Lever Act had aimed to do. But this was just the beginning. In fact, it would be one of many efforts launched in the 1930s to make sure a disaster like the Dust Bowl never happened again. The federal government created a national agency with the goal to guide farmers, pay them to stop overplowing, promote soil-saving techniques, encouraged planting soil-restoring crops, and worked to prevent overgrazing. It also funded the Shelter Belt Project, aiming to plant over 200 million trees from Texas to Canada. To relieve it all, in 1939, the rains finally returned. The drought's worst effects were officially over. However, that very same year, it seemed that history was about to repeat itself. As another world war broke out, the United States would once again become the world's main food supplier. This time, though, it was much wiser.